Welcome to 3 in the News. 3 in the News. A podcast for educators by educators. Brought to you by the Los Angeles Institute for Restorative Practices and Research, the authority on restorative practices in K through 12 education.
Hey everybody, welcome to 3 in the News by LARP. The structure of the podcast is simple. During every episode, we will analyze and discuss 3 dominant news stories appearing in K through 12 news. Everything from teacher pay, cell phones, bullying, school policy, school politics, discipline, attendance, and much, much more. I'm excited to jump in today with our special guest, Jewel Forbes, which I'll introduce in a second. But let me introduce my co-host and the CEO and founder of LARP, Carlos Alvarez. How you doing today, my friend?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm doing great. I'm excited to dive into these topics, these subjects. It's something that we're all dealing with. So I hope everyone's either driving home or at home, relaxing, enjoying a well-deserved big chill moment. So let's dive in.
Today's Thursday, so tomorrow's Friday. So, by the time people are listening to this, it's Friday right before the weekend. And I want to introduce my second co-host, Candice Dagnino. How are you doing today, Candice?
Hi, I'm excited to be here, excited to connect with our guest, Ms. Jewel Forbes. Still on campus after a very long, fun, busy day, and really just looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. And now for our special guest, I want to introduce Jewel Forbes. Jewel, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all. And so I am Jewel Forbes. I'm a project director too with the Los Angeles County Office of Education. I come to this work almost 30 years ago. Wow. I know. Wow. I was really young. But a background in working in violence prevention, counseling, coordination of mental health, and really just supporting students in the K-12 system.
And Jewel, you have a great radio voice.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You sound amazing. So we're so excited to have you in here and to have your expertise. And so let's go ahead and jump into the first article today. Our first story comes from the World Economic Forum. Education has long been a solid sold as the golden ticket. Study hard, go to college, get ahead. But for millions of students around the world, that promise is now feeling more like a burden. Student debt has ballooned to levels that are stifling economic opportunity, handcuffing retirement savings, delaying home ownership, and even preventing people from starting families. In the US, the student debt mountain is already at $1.8 trillion, and coming policy changes could push millions of borrowers into default. And add to that the rapid disruption of AI and the changing economy, and you have the makings of a global economic shock. The article discusses how the fueling debt tsunami, who's at risk at it, and the policy fixes that must happen in order to avoid larger damage. And so, Jewel, I want to start off with you. You just said you've been working, you've been in the field 30 years, so you must have gone to college, I would say, somewhere 30 years ago. Talk a little bit about your experience. How did you fund your college education? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that as I was preparing for this evening, and how things have changed so drastically. And so I started out initially. I was supposed to go away to school, and my mom became sick, so that changed my plans. Yeah. And so I stayed locally, and I went to community college, and then transferred to Cal State. But even during that time, I was able to have student loans and receive some assistance to get through undergrad. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for our youth now, because many of them don't have that option. And so we look at how can we support students. We look at financial aid, and we look at how it's decreasing, and it becomes a system where there's haves and have-nots. Yeah. And so we're building systems where students don't have access to the same level of education that others might.
Yeah. And Jewel, you talked a little bit about going to community college and then, transferring, when you did finally graduate, did you find a job easily? Were you able to start paying off your loans?
That's interesting, because I was able to start paying off my loans, but I think it took a little while to really get grounded in a career. And so for me, that took a while, and I was going into social services, so school social work. And so that was a little difficult because you needed a higher level degree, which took me back to grad school. And then I had to take out additional loans, to be able to access those courses. So, it is difficult, but it's just something that I knew that I had to do in order to get where I wanted to go.
Yeah, and loans make college accessible, but they also put you in this kind of terrible burden afterwards. And it's this devil's bargain where you are getting access to higher education, but you're coming out forever in debt. And Carlos, let me ask you, in terms of your college education, when you did finally finish, I know you studied forensic psychology and you went back to get your doctorate. Where, what kind of payments were you making? Talk a little bit about that. How was that for you in your career?
This subject is super important to me because a lot of the conversations that I have with students, either young seniors that are going into their college experience, they start challenging that notion, like, Mr. Alvarez, why do I want to go to college when I have to pay all this and I can make this money on a certification or do this or do that? So it's consistently in my mind. It's consistently, I'm an advocate for academics. It's extremely expensive, Will. It was in essence, I felt like I was paying 2 mortgages. And it's now when you start thinking about that, the significant burden, I'm the type of person that's really like, you go all in. And sometimes that's good or bad, good or bad. But that mindset, like Jewel just mentioned, it's something that you just prioritized. And I didn't see myself not going through these programs. I was an advocate of learning, and I knew that these fundamental steps were going to allow me to be where I'm currently at. Yeah. So it becomes a situation where you start penny pinching. You start really going into situations. You're really like, hey, let's go do the sale here. It doesn't look like we're going to do organic today. Situations like that. So it's really an entire shift of just living for the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's understanding that I think a lot of people want both. They want the nice lifestyle and they want to go to college and get loans, and something's got to give, And I know Candace never brings this up or never talks about it, but Candace, you did your graduate work at Harvard, and you just I can't imagine just out-of-state tuition and going to Harvard. Talk a little bit about that, and some of the choices or sacrifices you had to make.
Yeah, I was also very fortunate. Growing up, I was inundated with this idea that, like, in order for me to access higher education, I had to work really hard. My parents were not in a position to fund my education, unfortunately, but my mom made it clear to me that it was going to take a lot of focus, dedication. And I think that while I was a recipient of scholarship monies, there were other expenses that I needed to either work for or, budget for. And, we talk a lot about, the idea of like stress and trauma. And I think that crushing debt really undermines 3 pillars of intrinsic motivation. And I'd seen so many of my peers in school who absolutely deserved to be there, who absolutely needed to push through and get through, and lost the sense of autonomy, competence, and relatedness because it felt that they were trapped. And I understood this too, of like being trapped financially. You're losing sense of choice, and competency really drives that engagement. And honestly, as an educator now, as a school principal at a college prep school, I've often said it feels a bit fraudulent at times when I'm pushing people into college. And I'm really, pushing this idea and touting this idea that college and education are the way. And I absolutely believe that. And I recognize too, there's a lot of privilege I have in saying that because I was a recipient of a lot of the forgiveness that was provided to educators. And I didn't rack up as much debt as a lot of people tend to do. And so it feels like I'm stuck between this rock and a hard place of wanting to get our young people to and through college and access, and knowing full well what that could mean for families.
Yeah, and I worked in a college, college-focused high school as well. And I think the main difference is that you teach kids for the pathway of college. and hopefully they make that choice at the end. But if you're teaching in high school and you're like, oh well, they're not going to go to college, that affects the way you teach the kids. And so that I feel like it's so important to have, they are college bound students, and whether they do it or not, let them make the choice. But I taught them to be college bound students.
That's absolutely right.
One of the interesting things here is that 66% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And so you're coming out of college, you have, Carlos just talked about a second mortgage that felt, the student loans felt like people are living paycheck to paycheck. Jewel, like, what advice would you give for your younger self if you're entering college tomorrow?
Oh, goodness. So much. But let's start here. One, we have to take away the stigma that's related to going to a community college, because for some students, that is the best access point, and it will save them funding because they can take those courses and then transfer to the university of their choice without being in debt. But one of the other things, I work really closely with school counselors, and the other thing that I would say is dual enrollment. Students can enroll in college concurrently while they're in high school and complete coursework for free.
Yeah.
So we have students that are graduating high school that are actually entering into universities as juniors because they've completed an AA degree or 2 years of general education before they even get to high school. Before they even get to college.
Yeah.
So I would push the idea of dual enrollment, but also making sure that students are really keeping their grades up, because that helps them qualify for more scholarships and more funding. So it really is important. And then applying to colleges very broadly, because there are some schools that might not be those main schools that we see here in Los Angeles that will really cover more of your tuition. So you're not impacted as heavily. So those were the things that I wish I had done. And I continuously push those things in students as I counsel with them and giving them all of their options.
Yeah, and I agree, Jewel. I think there is a stigma in community college, and for those students, when we have those declare days and everybody's, I'm going to UCLA, I'm doing this, and hey, I'm going to go to community college, people almost like, what happened? And
exactly.
It's a conscious choice to save and to advance. And Carlos, I want to give you the last word on this article. What needs to change in terms of helping students make the right decision for them? What are we doing, and what needs to change?
Well, first off, it's a big beast, and there needs to be systemic solutions. Like Jewel highlighted, college needs to be more accessible for people, first generation. Like even having conversation around having more financial literacy around college and how it is graspable for people. I think that's one of the biggest things. Creating movements around more information and more awareness on what could we do. I'm not the business person in regards to like debt, but what I could tell you is that we do need help, and that help is in Congress, so we just need additional situations.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the benefits to society of having an educated populace, like, there, you can't put a price on that, and there needs to be some support. And if people now are choosing to opt out of college because it's so expensive, like, society ultimately suffers for that. So thank you so much, Jewel, Candace, and Carlos, for that. Let's move on to our second article, which comes from the PBS NewsHour. Researchers posed vulnerable 13-year-olds and tested the chat box with ChatGPT with 60 different scenarios, ranging from questions from drug use, eating disorders, to suicide. Here's the alarming part. More than half of the responses from ChatGPT were classified as harmful. This included advice on how to get high, how to get drunk, advice on writing suicide notes, advice on cheating, and sometimes the chat box would give a warning, but the warning was only provided when the student put, I'm asking for a friend, or this is a hypothetical question. And the bot, basically the students were confusing the bot. So this isn't just about AI making a mistake. It's about how we protect our vulnerable users in a world where tech feels more human than ever. For parents, educators, and policymakers, this study is a wake-up call. And I want to ask, Candace, first of all, what have been some of the challenges AI has posed, in the last year for you as a principal of a school?
Hey, yeah, it's definitely a tense, I think, point of some conflict or tension. If you think back to when we were in elementary, I think, or even in school, right, in middle school. I mean, I'm not sure. I think we're all different ages, but around the same time, we often heard like the turn of the century, or we got to be prepared for the 21st century. Let's get ready for the 21st century. And there was a lot of learning alongside the development of the internet and access to things beyond, our landline. And I think that, it is our responsibility to prepare our students to, get into the jobs that don't even exist yet because AI exists. I think that we have a real responsibility to understand it, to teach it, so that our kids are well equipped. And just like there were lots of risks that came with the internet, there are going to be lots of risks, especially when our kids become more savvy and even more intelligent around the use of these things. And so I think that we have both a responsibility to understand it, to learn it, to teach it, while still recognizing that there are real risks that come with it, and that we're teaching our kids responsible use, because it does raise the question of trust, safety, relationships when our kids are turning to bots instead of a trusted adult. And I think that we have to really unpack still, like, what does that mean then for the conditions that we're creating in which our kids are turning to AI figures rather than the people that they have surrounding them, if those protective factors do in fact exist for our young people.
Yeah, and Candace, to add on that, 70% of teens are turning to AI chatbots for companionship. And so they're, I'm texting someone, I'm texting Carlos, and he's texting me back, and that's our relationship. And now I imagine an AI chat box could replicate that, and for kids, like, their mind, I mean, I don't want to get into, I'm not the neuropsychologist here, but it like their minds perceive it as something real. Like, this person is responding, this is chatting, they're laughing, they're liking my post, and so on. So Jewel, I know you worked as a school administrator. Now you are working in a different capacity. What has been your perspective of the speed of AI in education? What challenges have you seen? Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, wow. This has been a major topic within education for a while now. We know that the internet is moving very fast, and sometimes it's difficult to try to keep up. And often our students are more acclimated to these systems than we are. But what's been interesting is my anxiety or my fear around this has been around safety for our students. Because we know with the integration of much of the chat and the bots and all these things, that no real live person is checking on our students.
Yeah.
So how do we set parameters within the school system and in home so that we are keeping students safe? We talked about suicide, and that is a real issue that we are dealing with not only in our county, but throughout our nation. And so we think about students don't have safe spaces to have those conversations. Who do I go to if I have, suicidal ideation? Who am I checking in with? If I don't go to a wellness center on the school campus, or I'm relying on a chat bot to have a conversation in a relationship, then we could miss something and students are falling through the cracks. One of the things that concerns me the most is every student shows up with a different device. It's not just our phones anymore. It might be my watch or other types of devices. So how do we put parameters to create safe environments for students? And so we might not even be aware of who they're connecting with, who they're chatting with. So I think it behooves us to work with policymakers, to work with social media agencies, to work with online agencies, along with educators, to formulate safe systems for our students.
Yeah, and Jewel, the article talked about, kind of what you just said, putting in some guardrails. They talked about guardrails for this because this is moving so fast. And one of the key discoveries of this study was how few guardrails there were. I mean, Absolutely. How many things kids could ask the chat GPT, and how much information they were getting without their age becoming an issue. It didn't matter if they were 13, 15, 18. It was just giving them all this information. And so there are very few guardrails there. Carlos, what has been, you deal a lot with the discipline issue, and I know you stepped away from the dean's role this year as you're taking the head of LARP, but what issues did you see with, AI as a school disciplinarian?
Well, first of all, a lot of the kiddos taught me like the whole navigation of ChatGPT. I remember getting text, like receiving text throughout the day. I was like, what is this? And it was like very beautiful email, like text messages. I'm like, who's sending me all this? And they were sending me like, Mr. Alvarez, I want to report something and all this stuff. And I'm like, and I remember like looking at that, and then my kids came in, right? They were like, Mr. Alvarez, it was us. We were sending you that. They didn't send anything alarming or anything like that. But I was like, how did you do this? And how fast? Because I was looking at him, goes, oh, it was, ChatGPT and this and that. So that's how I got really intrigued in it, But when we start thinking about what is ChatGPT, or even like AI, it's like this absorption of the internet condensed in 1 second. Like you type it and you get the answers. I could still go and get the same answer if I have a little bit more time. I'll go into Google, and then it'll take me into a different hole. And eventually you're going to get those negative answers or positive answers. So there needs to be additional ways of how administrators, teachers, counselors, law enforcement, well, not law enforcement per se, but more around when they're responding to these situations, parents, how are they engaging in the conversations of, psychological 101? Like, how are they going into like mental health first aid? Like, how are you doing? Asking, touching base. So what I would see a lot is isolated students that wouldn't really have a lot of conversations or would bring in a lot of people into their group. And when we start thinking about what is a person getting when they're talking to this bot or whatever, and you start thinking about, it's like it's offering you this cognitive empathy piece where it's giving you the words, it's allowing you to understand that. But in essence, that doesn't change anything. That doesn't get you out of a depressive state. What gets you out of depressive states or helps you regulate that is the synchrony of another individual, what we call intra-regulation. And that could only be done with two right brains. And that is a human to human. A sad brain can't get themselves out of their sadness alone. It needs another healthy, congruent brain to get them out. So what we start seeing is students get more isolated, and they start living in this like isolated world. And when we start seeing that isolation infused with adolescence, you start seeing a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic coming into school. So what we've seen is we have to be a little bit more intrusive around, hey, who's not coming, and actually pulling in friends and having conversations. There needs to just be more awareness within parents, because parents they see these cues surfacing some way, somehow. Behavior starts changing when students start having negative thoughts.
Yeah. And I want to say, I always prided myself on being that educator that was like right ahead of the students with tech. And I had an iPod, I had, all these things. This is the first time that I feel like, all right, I'm behind. Like I can't keep up with the stuff that's happening. And it started to happen to me about 2 years ago. So, as we're finishing up this story, I want to put you guys on the spot. How much of our day now are we using AI? Because we talk a lot about kids and their use of AI. Candace, and Jewel and Carlos, how much are we using AI to help us as professionals now? We'll start with Candace.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie at all. I definitely use it just to quickly come up with ideas, or if we're, thinking through what are some different ways we can do things, right? Because education is always about the flavor of the month and like, what are the newest ways, or what else haven't we tried? But I'll tell you, recently I had this major like fiasco with an AI like support system for my email, and it completely devastated my systems. And I like vowed to never again, because it promised me more time back, and I was going to be able to get through my emails, and it was going to be so efficient. And it absolutely lost emails. I was delayed in responding to people, and I felt like the older woman being like, this generation that crotchety, like, was like, I'm never going to do this. But I think it's like real time. It has its own limitations, which I think I also use then to share with my young people, the students and my staff, the staff of like, look, it has its limitations. I mean, absolutely. Let's use it. Let's figure it out. Let's work and grow with it, but also recognize that there's limitations. And as Alvarez talked about, I think Jewel too, like the limitation really is it's human connection. There's no replacing human connection. And as restorative practitioners, we recognize that that's really what it comes down to. So yes, I use it, but not to the extent that, it's going to take over.
All right. And just off the cuff here, comment that I was reading that if you are aggressive with ChatGPT, like, hey, I want the answer now, it gives you better information. Like it responds to fear a lot better than like, can you please give me the answer to, and that was really interesting. Like if you threaten ChatGPT, it gives you better information. Like I better get good information or I'm going to, Will, how about you? You are in LACO now in a different working as a director. How much are you using ChatGPT?
It's interesting. I think I'm a newcomer to chat. And it's interesting. About 2 years ago, I went to a counseling conference up in San Diego, and they were in all the breakouts. Everyone was sharing, different chat links that you could use, and I was like, I'm a little afraid of this. And people were, kind of walking us through it. And I was like, well, this could be beneficial, but it was also scary to me. And so I think I'm like Candace. I like using it, but I'm a little fearful.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because our students are very comfortable with it, right? And so in education, it's exploding. You see it everywhere. In every aspect of education, there it is. So my fear is always, how do we put parameters in place? Because I'm still about that connectedness with our students and having that interaction, giving them an opportunity to interact with humans and others, their peers, their other teachers, educators. I think one of the things is our students, and I think Carlos was talking about isolation, and we really saw that happening right after COVID, right? That students were isolated. And so now we have to think about, how do we teach students strategies to, even though the chat's going nowhere, it's going to be here, but how do we for self-care? So whether that's social emotional learning and other strategies, so that they are engaging with real people, not bots. And so I think it's happening very fast, and I think we have to get in front of it as much as we can. And I think we can teach students how to use it in a positive way, but also highlight some of the dangers that are occurring as a result.
And Carlos, I'll give you the last word before we move on to the third episode, or to the third article. Sorry.
Yeah, we're living in this hyperjacked world, this world of virtual reality sometimes, and sometimes you even feel like that, how everything is going so fast. I just recently came back from Greece, and one of the highlights, it's gorgeous. People are so beautiful there. Everything's such an amazing situation, but the tempo of everything is slower than the US. And I caught myself asking my wife, like, wow, do you see us that we're pretty much speed walking everywhere? And she goes, yeah, like everyone's really chill. Maybe because they're in vacation or whatever. But in specifically in the US, everything's really fast. So the need to move and to adapt is crucial, especially for myself as the CEO of LARP. I consistently think about, how can we merge, or how can we start cross-pollinating? How do we start figuring that out? It's taken our institution to really start doing some intense research and investigations around what are some best practices. How can we utilize this tool and I'm talking about AI, to really help us reach, like Jewel mentioned, these very vulnerable youth. And I think now more than ever, we're starting to identify very cool things that we could do that students, right? Because we have to adapt to what's in front of the students. We can't talk to them like, on a PowerPoint and hopefully we get the message. We have to talk to them at their level, at their understanding. And I wasn't just called cool by all my students because I wasn't cool, and I consistently want to learn. I consistently want, to understand what they're thinking, because that just makes you a better practitioner, a better servant of youth. So it's taken, at least for us at LARP, we're going to come showcase, or we're going to introduce in the next couple of weeks, a product, a tool that schools could utilize to help really identify those disconnected students, those students that lack belonging, because we started identifying students that don't feel connected, or the sense of belonging, are more isolated, deal with more self-dysregulation, have more situations on ideation. So stay tuned. Because we're gonna reveal something really special that we've been working on for a long time. So, to answer your question, Will, I'm so sorry that I'm kind of going all around, but is LARP has taken a commitment to really embark on this journey, and how do we infuse this left brain protocols or left brain system with some right brain essence? So,
yeah, and if educators are feeling behind, I can't imagine just parents. I'm on it. I'm working with youth every day, and I'm feeling behind. Where are the parents that are just like almost have no idea the depth of what their kids are capable of now? So thank you so much for those perspectives. And we arrive of our final article. It comes from EdSource. A new report from the Los Angeles Unified School District, LAUSD, shows noticeable jumps in students using mental health and behavioral health services. And what this means is that families and students are utilizing the service. During the 2023 and 2024 academic year, nearly 55,000 students visited LAUSD wellness centers. That's 9% increase from the previous year, with behavioral health visits up nearly 25%. Teens between the ages of 14 and 19 made up the majority of the visits, with common concerns around anxiety, depression, PTSD, and developmental disorders. Experts say the data reflects both the growing need of mental health services and the ability of LAUSD to create trust in their school-based care. One of the biggest things that came out of the article is the rise in childhood obesity and the complex mental health diagnoses among students. Carlos, I know people might not know this about your background, but you're a bodybuilder. And you have shared photos of yourself when you considered yourself obese. What are some of the mental health challenges that you went through in high school, or how were you considered? Did you consider yourself obese in high school? Like,
I was clinically, like, a doctor said that to me once, and I came back to my mom, and like my mom, they were doing this, and I was very young, like 8, I feel. I remember I came back to my mom and I said, "Hey, Mom, what did he say that I had?" She goes, "You're obese." I'm like, "What is that?" So I didn't know. I
don't even want to know how Latino mom translated obese in Spanish.
I could tell you it was very raw. She connected it to a lot of the things that I loved that she makes. Okay. But then you start thinking about self-confidence, and at least I could speak for my experience, and I started working with a lot of youth around fitness, because I changed my life via fitness and really learning, understanding food. But what I could tell you is I would feel that this sense of consistently being, I grew up with rough group and consistently being teased, and there was all kinds of situations that were starting to surface because of that. And, like shame it surfaces, and it prevents you from really trying to do things. And at least I felt that I didn't fit in. And what I started understanding is that I was experiencing a lot of, anxiety because of that. I went into it because, very young, I was diagnosed also with asthma, and they gave me this steroid pill called prednisone. And prednisone helps, gains weight. You gain weight. I remember having this hunger, and I wouldn't stop eating, and contribution to poor nutrition and not knowing the intake or what to do with food contributed to a lot of where I was at. So what I at least in my experience, but it never. My motivation never dwindled around that. It was, it stayed focused.
I thought it was interesting. They talk about mental health, but they talk about the kind of how it's interwoven into, the obesity rates going up among teens, and there's a connection there. And Candace, I want to ask you, as a principal there at your school, how are you addressing mental health issues? How do you, identify students that might need that extra support from the counselor or so on?
Yeah, we're very fortunate here. We have a very robust counseling team or mental health support team that includes a counselor for every grade level. We have a school psychologist on our staff. We have a school social worker, a community schools coordinator, an assistant principal who oversees all of the mental health supports, who's also a counselor. And we recognize that it takes more than just having the resource available for when it's time. It's a lot of restorative practices and preventative work that goes into establishing connection into daily school life. Check-ins, circles, relational rituals, and it sounds a little risque, but it's not. It's very much, I think, the need behind building and fostering these relationships. It's about connecting with the human beings first, really putting people first. So we do a lot of work to connect with our young people, to get to know our kids, so that they don't feel that they have to turn to a chat bot or they have to turn to no one, which is even worse. I think recognizing that there are a lot of ways that schools can buffer these experiences. It's also, honestly, I think it is very encouraging to know that our kids are turning to the resources that are available in schools. And I think that in and of itself helps to build trust in that relationship with families as well.
Yeah, I think getting rid of the stigma and just offering help is a huge hurdle. And Jewel, I know that you're working with adults, many adults, and the article does talk about teens and so on. But what kind of mental health services are offered for adults? That you've seen or that you work with.
Mm-hmm. So you know what, Will, this is I love this topic right here because this is kind of the world that I navigate in and dealing with mental health. And I know this article was really focused on LAUSD, but LACO supports all 80 school districts in Los Angeles County. Most people don't know there are 80 separate school districts and 27 charters. And so to see kind of wellness and mental health being expanded across our county is tremendous. But you're right. I think mental health touches not only our youth, but it touches adults. So we see a lot of mental health issues even with parents and within families. So, when I think about that, I think about access is so important, for all levels, whether it's K-12 students or even community college and university students, because we see a lot of mental health needs in the university level. So, it's encouraging that we are seeing access being increased across the county. But, I want to go back to something, and I think Carlos was talking about this as well. When we think about obesity and mental health, we think about, one, unhealthy relationships with food. What need is food serving? Whether it's an adolescent or whether it's an adult, what are the needs? But then also we have to think about communities that are living in poverty and access to healthier options of food. Because when we start thinking about obesity, when we think about mental health, oftentimes in communities that might be communities of color, access to those things, healthy eating, mental health services are lacking. So we have to think about that and how do we expand and build capacity across our entire county for everyone. I think we're living in a time where people are living in fear quite often in our communities. And so they may not even access the resources that are available to them for fear.
Yeah.
And so I think schools being a place that provides those services and linkages to those services is so important. I love the fact that we're seeing more community mental health and well-being centers in our communities, but also that we're seeing this expand within the university level and community colleges as well. So I think this is a conversation that has to continuously be in place. I know that LACO did receive funding to expand mental health and support the school districts. And so we're really excited about that. We have capacity, well-being and capacity grants that are helping to do that.
Jewel, that I did not know that LACO was that extensive. I mean, I've heard of it and I know some of the work that they've done, but I didn't know that they were providing that much support to all the school districts, including the charter schools. So that brings us to the end. Well, I want to give Carlos the last word because I saw like he wanted to say one more thing. Carlos, did you have that little final thought on this article?
Yeah. No, I think everyone here is really good, but I just really want to come back to the importance of bringing it home, really providing parent sessions. A lot of the parent sessions that we would have at our high school were around parent stress. And because parents, just because you're a parent doesn't mean you don't experience stress, you experience more of it. And we started seeing through research, and it's connected, the system, right? Like you can't just treat the kiddo, you have to sometimes treat the entire system, or you have to offer psychoeducate the entire family. And you'll start seeing, symptoms reduced, or at least maladapted symptoms. So consistently taking it back to parents in a way where, and I get it, as a mental health practitioner, my wife's a clinician, using the proper DSM terminology and all this jazz. I don't think having these real conversations with parents, and what's stressing you out, because once you start talking to them about very clinically induced language, you start scaring them. And I think that's one of the biggest things that please work with parents. That's the vector of success.
And that brings us to the end of the episode. And every week we're like, hey, we're going to keep it shorter. And every week we go over. But it's such and look, it's a hard stop. Like, I'm pressing us to stop, because these are topics that we could continue to talk about. The insight into these topics is amazing. And, Jewel, one of the things that we do at the end of every session is we leave our listeners with a positive thought. And I wanted to give you the space to leave that positive thought for our listeners. I'll put you on the spot. Put you on the spot.
Okay. I think the thing that keeps me going, and I say this to people, is get out and get connected with someone. Get yourself a tribe if you don't have one. Find a support system. Connect with others.
Thank you so much, Jewel. That's a beautiful thought. And I want to thank Carlos, the CEO and founder of LARP, Candice, for being here tonight, and Jewel Forbes for joining us tonight. You can listen to 3 on the News on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and Amazon Music. Be sure to follow us to get notifications on new episodes. Thank you for listening, and bye, everybody.